What's the one moment in your life you still can't explain, even though you've replayed it in your head 1,000 times? Story 1. My cousin, when he was on deployment, had a dream he was fishing with our grandpa and that he said it was great to see him one last time before he left. As soon as he woke up, he called his mommy aunt, who was taking care of him, and he passed away just minutes before he called. Answer: something similar happened to my dad. When he was in the Army, he had a dream where he was walking in the woods and came across a log cabin. When he knocked on the door, someone who he had never seen before opened the door and told him his grandfather was dead. When he woke up the next day, he got a call from his family with the news that his grandfather passed. Story 2. No one ever believes me, but here goes. When I was in college, I shared a room with a friend of mine from high school. One night I was sleeping and had a dream where he and I were on this huge pile of garbage, searching for something. We were both digging in the trash. Then I woke up. I got up and went to the bathroom. When I climbed back in bed, my roommate kind of stirred and mumbled, "I found it. It's over here," and then rolled over and went quiet again. The next morning, he didn't remember any of it. I didn't dream getting out of bed. I didn't dream his response. Answer: I had a roommate in college who talked in her sleep most nights. I do it from time to time, but usually only if I'm sick or influenced in some way. A few times I would wake up in the middle of saying a sentence and I'd hear her respond. I realized we were speaking to each other in our sleep. I don't recall anything about my dreams then, but I wouldn't be surprised if we were incorporating each other into our dreams via conversation. I bet that's what happened to you. Story 3. This was in the early 90s when caller ID was still pretty new. My dad called. He was hours away with our church youth group. The number from where he was came up on the caller ID, and I glanced at it before answering. His voice was obviously distressed. He asked to talk to my mom. She wasn't home. He told me he'd call back. I couldn't shake the tone of his voice, and I knew something was wrong. When my mom returned, edited to add, she came back about an hour after his call. I told her, "Hey, Dad called and I think something's wrong. You need to call him." She went to the caller ID and the number was gone, but I remembered it. Literally one glance and I just recited the number. She looked at me funny and called the number I gave her. It was a hospital. One of the kids on the youth trip drowned, and my dad needed my mom to go tell the kid's family. In all of the horror of the day and days after that, one weird detail never left me. I do not have an eidetic memory. Something just in that moment stored it in my brain until my mom was home. Answer: we obviously still don't know very much about the brain. I believe that sometimes the brain decides to remember something because it knows it may be extremely important. This is probably what happened to you. It probably sensed the tone of your dad's voice and made that decision to allow you to remember the number when you normally otherwise wouldn't be able to. I don't believe the whole "you only use 10 of your brain Bs, but I do think that because we really don't understand a lot about it, it has the potential to do weird things like this in certain situations. Story 4. I posted this yesterday in another thread, but I think it fits here, so I leave it here a second time. This happened a few years ago when I was working night shifts at a bakery. I used to walk to work through a wooded path that opened into a wide lawn. One night, I noticed a small, flickering light in the distance. Curious, I stepped off the main path and crossed the grass toward it. When I got closer, I saw what it was. In the middle of the field was a miniature dollhouse with candles burning inside, lighting up the tiny windows. I stood there for a moment, confused, unsure what to make of it, especially since those candles don't burn forever, you know. I looked around but did not see anyone. Eventually, I turned around and continued to work, but that image has stuck with me since. Nothing too crazy happened. It's just that I still have no idea how it got there or why it was there. Just weird. Answer: that reminds me of once I was going camping after I got off work. I had a particular place in mind up on the mountain outside of town. I get there and no one is there, but there's a fire going with fresh wood on the fire and a nice stack of wood right next to it. It was a place where I should have been able to see someone if they were remotely close by, and if they weren't, they shouldn't have left a fire unattended. I also didn't see anyone leaving the area as I was heading up. I ended up just camping next to the fire, but now years later it does seem spooky and like a questionable decision to stay there. Story 5. In somewhat 2006-2010, we had weirdly orange day in Siberia. Like sun was orange, sunlight was orange. It was so weird I thought it was the end of the world. It was not a dream. Like in some kind of Truman Show, top lamps were improperly configured with too much orange tint. Story 6. One time, when I was 7 or 8, I lost this ring my grandma gave me. She hadn't passed, but just lived far, and I missed her badly. So when I lost it, I was basically hysterical. Searched all day and cried myself to sleep when I couldn't find it. The next day, I found it perfectly placed on my bedside table. Obviously, I was overjoyed and thanked my parents for finding it, but neither of them had and told me it would have been my brothers. Neither of my brothers were the ones who found it, and I strongly doubt they would have bothered to look. Everyone fell asleep before me, and I was a light enough sleeper that I would have noticed someone coming into my bedroom to look. Even if it had been my parents, they had no reason to lie or to not tell me where they had found it. I never figured out who returned it to me, but I still have it. Answer: I once an earring that I really loved. I wore it everywhere for years. We looked so many places for it. We combed through the park where we had been and our home. Never found it. A few months later, my father suddenly dies. He was one of my best friends. I adored him. One day, several months after he'd passed away, my husband found my earring on our patio on the ground. It had been more than a year and we had repeatedly looked all over the patio for it. It was also like someone just placed it there for us to find. I like to think it was my dad telling me he loved me by finding my missing earring. Story 7. I was sitting in class, 8th grade, and had this overwhelming emotion sweep over me. I started bawling and was sent to the office. I called my mom to come and pick me up, and she agreed because I never missed school and never caused trouble. My dad had been really sick for almost my entire life, so I just went home and I crawled in bed next to him and watched our usual World War II documentary, and we both fell asleep. I woke up a few hours later holding his hand and turned to look at my dad, and I knew he was dead. I sat there for a few minutes in absolute shock before going out to tell my mom. All these years later, I can't explain what came over me sitting in class, but I knew I had to go home, and nothing was going to stop me from being next to my daddy that day. Story 8. There was one time when I was about 17, driving back home with some friends, and everything on the street, including in the car, went straight black. Almost like a power surge, but not a single piece of light was on for about a solid second. I get how it could happen outside of the car, but inside, all dash lights, the radio, and even the headlights turned off. It was strange. Answer: I have a similar funny experience that this reminded me of. I was doing some sketchy shoot with a friend, probably buying substances IDK, and she told me to turn my headlights off. When I did, the entire street lost power. Weird timing and coincidence, but I'll always remember the look on her face asking me what on earth I did to the rest of the lights. Story 9. My late wife, who had been recently diagnosed epileptic after a head injury, was taking a bath, and I had music cranking, Led Zeppelin's In My Time of Dying, when I heard her say, "Help, get in here." I ran there and found her face down in the tub, seizing, face underwater, and got her out. The part I cannot explain was how I heard her. The music was so loud that there was no possible way I could have heard her with my ears. To this day, I believe I heard her in my mind. Answer: there is a story I read about where a car had gone over a bridge, and the rescuers, like they all corroborated the story in an interview, heard the mother yelling that there was a baby in the car. They rescued the baby and found the mother had drowned. Long story short, they found out that the mother had already died before the EMTs could have heard her shout about the baby. Story 10. I was talking with my wife when all of a sudden, our 2 children walk out of one of the bedrooms. I'm standing in their way, and they just move past me to the French doors leading to the lanai. They don't say anything and have like a blank stare. I tell my wife, "Get a load of these 2. Seems like they think they are their own bosses." And we both laughed it off. I open the doors for them and let them out. I continue the conversation with my wife, and we are both laughing at how our 4- and 5-year-olds decided they were going to go out whether we liked it or not. About 10 minutes later, I open the door to the lanai to check on them, except they are nowhere to be found. I go to the backyard and I'm in a panic because I'm thinking they went off to cross the street or something. Meanwhile, my wife goes to the front yard to see if they are out there, and there is no trace of them. Finally, I go to one of the rooms and open the door. I see both of them sitting on the bed playing with their toys. I'm so confused because to come back in, they would have had to open the door where I was standing in front of. So I asked my eldest, "Hey, how did you guys get back in?" And he says, "Get back in from where? We've been here playing in the room this whole time." Answer: this happened to me with my roommate. She was walking down the hallway with a blank stare and carrying a green charging cord in a very odd way, like both hands at chest height but not pressed against her body. The way she just rounded the corner and went in her room was so weird and creepy. I didn't go to check the living room or her room. The next morning, that darn green cable was still in the same spot in the living room. It gave me chills, and I can still vividly visualize it. WTF was that with the cord? Story 11. I was driving from Milwaukee to the Wisconsin Dells, and near Sun Prairie, a good 50 minutes from home, we passed a very distinct car, shoot old Toyota, windows down, driver didn't have a shirt, dog in the back seat. We then realized we forgot something really important, so had to head home and grab it. Then, near Sun Prairie, the second time though, we passed the exact same car in almost the exact same spot. There was no mistaking this vehicle, the driver, the dog. All the same, almost 2 hours later, my wife and I still talk about it. Answer: that happened to me once. Honestly, just a wholesome story. Myself and another motorist were driving very distinct vehicles, him in a purple Jeep and me in a Plymouth Reliant. Saw him at 9 a.m. on my way to work when he gave me a thumbs up, and then 8 hours later on my way home I saw him again at the same intersection. He excitedly waved at me, and I waved back, and then I went on my way. Millions of people in that city, and we happened to cross paths twice that day. Story 12. I swear I'm not making this up, but I once saw someone who looked exactly like me. Same clothes, same bag, everything. Walk out of a store that I was literally about to enter. We locked eyes for half a second, and then they just turned the corner and vanished. My mom was with me, and she saw him too. Still bothers me to this day. Answer: I used to have friends tell me they saw me places that I wasn't. Some said they would call my name and I'd just walk right by them like I didn't hear them. Later on, I was at an event at my favorite bar bowling alley. There was a bunch of bands playing a show and artists selling their stuff. I was having a drink, chatting with some friends, when someone that looked exactly like me walked by. Immediately, I'm like, "Oh, you tough," is going on. And one of my friends says, "Oh yeah, that's the guy that looks like you." He was one of the vendors at the show. I talked to him for a bit, checked out his art and stuff. Weirdest part is he was making art that was eerily similar to mine. Anyway, found out from other people that he was kind of a jerk. So I'm not the evil twin, I guess. Story 13. How the Tooth Fairy managed to make the exchange. When I was at the point of working out, it was mom and dad. I conducted an experiment to prove the Tooth Fairy wasn't real. I had just lost a tooth, and although they knew, it was the middle of the day, and traditionally the tooth goes under the pillow at night. We were going out somewhere, and so I placed it in a glass on the windowsill. I was the last one out of the house. They were backing down the driveway when I ran out. I was the first one in the house upon return because I wanted to see the tooth to prove that the Tooth Fairy wasn't real. Well, fudge me. There was 2 in that glass. Answer: I have a similar story. When I was younger, I conducted an experiment to prove to myself that Santa was real. I thought I knew in my heart of hearts, but I wanted to test my theory empirically. It was my belief that Santa could read your mind since it helps him make the naughty or nice list. So I decided on Christmas Eve that out of the 8 cookies placed on the mantle, if the blue cookie had only 1 bite out of it while all the tiebreaker were eaten, then Santa was real without a doubt. So come morning, I go downstairs and see the platter with only 1 cookie left. The blue one with just a few nibbles taken out. This cemented that Santa was real in my mind, and I explained to my parents why I knew so that morning. I don't know how only that cookie with those conditions was left, as I didn't tell a soul, but it had me a believer for a long time past where it should have, haha. Story 14. My wife, girlfriend at the time, and I were living in our first apartment. There was a strict no pet policy, but there was a stray cat living outside that she just had to bring in. One night I was sitting on our bed and the cat started clawing up the bedroom carpet where the bedroom door meets the hallway. My wife heard the sound and charged down the hallway from the living room, yelled at the cat, and just as she came into my view in the doorframe, she raised her hands to clap to scare the cat, but she didn't clap. I watched her hands stop midair. The cat ran off, so she stopped mid-clapping motion. A split second later, about the time it would have taken for her hands to connect for a clap, there was a loud, unmistakable clap sound that reverberated through the hallway. We both heard it and froze. She immediately looked at me pale-faced with a terrified look. I didn't clap. This was almost 20 years ago, and the thought still gives me chills. Story 15. I'm not particularly a believer in the paranormal or stuff like I'm about to write, but here goes. When I was about 6, my parents were going to a concert. Felicia came over to babysit my 11-year-old sister. We were in the completely dark house watching The Bodyguard when I looked over and saw my dad in the doorway down the hall. Same outfit he left in, but he had a black eye. I turned to Felicia and my sister to tell them, turn back, and he was gone. I explained what happened, and we were all so freaked out that we turned on the lights for the rest of the night. Fast forward to the morning. I get up and Dad is in the kitchen. He turns around and has a black eye. Some woman decked him and gave him a shiner. Felicia and my sister confirmed that I saw it the night before and we were still all freaked out. Story 16. One day my mom picked me up from the kindergarten as usual. As soon as we got home, I went straight to the room I shared with my brother and turned the lights on. This was highly unusual behavior since it was still daytime and we'd normally take our jackets and shoes off first. There was a small chandelier in the room with 3 incandescent light bulbs, each encased in a larger glass globe that diffuses the light. The moment I turned the switch on, every single one of those bulbs and globes exploded and shattered. Such bulbs would usually die due to the wolfram filament burning out, which would only cause the bulb to go dark and develop a singed spot. All these bulbs shattered with such force that they managed to also blow up the much thicker glass surrounding them. Thankfully, no one was in the room or got hurt. We kept the chandelier, and nothing like that happened since. 30 years later, I still can't explain what compelled me to do that, and I wonder whether it was some kind of instinct that helped prevent more serious consequences. Story 17. Oh my God, finally I have somewhere to share this. 2 years ago, I was watching a movie on the couch with my husband and fell asleep next to him. I can hear in my sleep a loud, almost train sound and wake up to him nudging me saying, "Listen, do you hear that?" I've never heard anything like this near our house. It sounded almost like a train literally going over our house, but it was so incredibly loud and didn't fade out. It lasted for at least 2 minutes straight. We live in a fairly rural neighborhood. There's train tracks about a mile away, but this isn't what it sounded like. It was so loud it felt like it was shaking the house. We could never figure out WTF it was. It couldn't have been a jet or anything because it went on for so long. It couldn't have been a truck. We thought through every possible thing it could have been, and nothing fit. We were so stunned and freaked out that we couldn't even move or say anything the entire time. But I wish we had gone outside to see WTF it was. It was just so insanely loud that we were just stunned. Story 18. When I was a kid, I had a toy tank type thing that shot plastic missiles. One time, I shot a missile out of it, and it just vanished. I saw it fly the general direction it was pointed, but kind of glanced away for a split second, and it was gone. It was absolutely nowhere to be seen. The floor was completely free of clutter, and there wasn't any furniture for it to go under. It was bright yellow and usually really easy to find. I spent ages searching for it, and even drafted my mom in to help, but we couldn't find it, and we never did. Answer: I moved into a house that had been used as a rental for years, and there were many odd things underneath the kitchen cupboards. To get to them, I had to unscrew the toe kick and take it out, which I planned on doing because I was painting it. I'm sure nobody else unscrewed that, removed it, and put 2 fat plastic coat hangers and several children's toys underneath it. I bet to them they just disappeared. To me, it's a puzzle how they got there. Really, how could they have gotten there? Weird. Story 19. My husband and I went to visit my mother-in-law one day. We had our son in a stroller and needed to change buses and go by trains in between. We had planned out a 20-minute wait at a station to be sure to have time for the connections. We had a pleasant wait. The station was quiet. The summer day not too hot or cold. The wind was soft and the sound slightly muffled or lazy. When we arrived at my mother-in-law's, the time was an hour later than we'd planned out. We tried to figure out what had happened by checking the timestamps on the tickets, but we could not find a logical explanation from the tickets. We'd lost an hour on that train station. Story 20. I really clicked with someone and we kept having little romantic movie moments that were already inexplicable. But once I messaged her about a song I was listening to that related to our complicated situation. I received a message from her a few seconds later that she was driving home and she had to pull over to reply because the same song happened to be playing on her car radio. Story 21. When we bought our house, there was a basketball hoop in the driveway. The previous owner came and picked it up not long after we bought because we didn't want it. His son used to shoot ball on it. About 5 or 6 years later, my daughter told me one morning that someone was bouncing a basketball in the driveway during the night. Her bedroom is on the driveway side. Now we live in the country. I only have a neighbor, and his house is quite far, and he is in his. I told my daughter she must have been dreaming. Next morning, she told me again she heard a basketball bouncing. I thought it was strange, but forgot about it. About a month later, my neighbor told me the son of the previous owner died suddenly. I asked him when exactly. He told me, and it was pretty much exactly when my daughter heard the basketball. Never heard it before or since. Story 22. My best friend died of cancer in 2017. He and I always joked about show me something when you are in the afterlife. And he said if he could, he would. Few years later, I visited his grave on an afternoon in the weekend. And that evening, I just couldn't sleep. My boyfriend was already snoring and sleeping. I went downstairs to go to the toilet. And when I was done, I walked through my living room towards the stairs and couldn't help but feeling something. I turned around and a giant ball of light was floating through my living room. I was in shock, ran up the stairs, got in bed, and woke up my boyfriend. He could feel I was shaking, and I told him I think I just saw my evidence of the afterlife. It's still something very emotional for me to share, and no matter what people may say, I cherish this memory. Answer: one of my best friends died in 2019. I took his passing very hard naturally. A short while later, I had a dream, I guess. I was talking to him about my Super Bowl party, and he said he planned to be there. That's when it occurred to me he was dead. I said, him, but you won't be there because you're dead. He looked at me and half chuckled and said, yeah, and smiled. I asked him, how is it being dead? He replied in a nonchalant way that he always did, it's all right. I opened my eyes. I was in my bathroom. I never dreamt about him since. I'm sure it was just a dream, but I'd like to think it was him telling me I'm okay. Love and miss you, Big Kev. Story 23. I was sitting in the tub and I must have been too young to speak because I started crying wildly until I was taken out. I stopped crying. Back into the tub. Same thing, but crying uncontrollably, so I was taken out. Pipes suddenly burst spraying hot water where I was sitting. Story 24. There come to mind, one, got the call that my father passed when I was with my grandparents' vacation home, and we obviously packed up and left. I was the last one in that room, and I was with them the first time they went back 2 months later. I walked into that same room first, and written in the dust on the TV was, name, I miss you. No one had been in that house since we left. 2, there was a hammer laying in the middle of a table behind me. I heard a single loud thud. When I turned around, the hammer was on the floor maybe 5 feet away. Windows were closed, so there was no window to blow it off the table. And even if there was, it's a hammer. Too heavy for wind to do that. And like I said, it was a single thud. Quite a distance for it to go without a bounce or skidding across the floor. 3, I was looking at an old video game strategy guide late at night. I'm pretty sure it was for Vagrant Story, so I'd have to be about 13. I heard someone yell, you will believe in me, but like from inside my head? Answer: 3, I was looking at an old video game strategy guide late at night. I'm pretty sure it was for Vagrant Story, so I'd have to be about 13. I heard someone yell, you will believe in me, but like from inside my head? I had something similar when I was younger. Late middle school to early high school US. I forget how old that is. I was playing this game called Gary's Mod, which had a bunch of user-run servers with their own game modes that you could explore from the main menu. I saw something called Surf once and decided to try it. If you don't know what Surf is, it's like a lengthy obstacle course with slanted walls running through the whole thing. You fall on one of the slopes, then abuse source engine mechanics and sloped walls to turn downward force into forward momentum. You build up speed and use that speed to navigate the aerial obstacle course. I had no idea how to start, and I was too much of a lowercase g gamer to look up a tutorial. So I just kept throwing myself at the triangle and failing off the course. There was a voice inside my head, not in the auditory hallucination sense, but in the voice that thinks before speaking sense. That started coaching me through the game mode. It started with thoughts like finger off the W key and follow the curve with your mouse that were just like my thoughts, except I wasn't the one thinking them. Later on, it progressed into the voice controlling my trackpad hand so I could focus on the easy keyboard stuff, and ended with the voice just straight up surfing for me while I watched and learned. I went from having never played before to being a professional surfer in a day. It took a few years before I realized that the way I learned to surf was different from everyone else. A few years even further, I was diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder. It's possible I was possessed with the spirit of a capital G gamer who taught me the secrets of Gmod surf, and I like this interpretation best, but I think it's more likely that it was an alter. Story 25. I was always home alone for an hour or two before my bus came, and the bus picked me up at the end of our long driveway. It never occurred to me to feel scared, because TBH I was excited to watch cartoons and not be around my abusive stepdad. One morning I heard the distinct click of the basement door, or over the sound of the TV. I yelled out, I haven't seen you. Please don't hurt me. I'll walk out the door right now. I won't tell anyone. I grabbed my backpack and ran out to the end of the driveway. It was near the end of the school year, so it was warm enough outside that the kitchen window was cracked open. From the end of the driveway, I could hear glasses and plates being thrown on the ground and shattering. I didn't mention it to anyone, and when I got home, there was no sign that anyone had been there. Nothing was broken or stolen. Story 26. I have a very rare book. Like, there are few copies and there is no one to buy on the internet except on a used book website for around 300 reais. My book is completely destroyed, falling apart, and this book literally changed my life. It's about the occult, to clarify. As it's old, I went to a random print shop near work to see if they would restore it for me. To my surprise, no, they didn't do that. But the owner told me, I have this book. I bought it in the 80s and I'm getting rid of it from my library. He gave me the book in new condition. What are the chances? I can't explain this coincidence. Story 27. During summer when school was out, I used to like to stay up late. In the middle of the night, one night I had to go to the bathroom. I heard my radio turn on while I was washing my hands. Couldn't have been my parents because if they had gotten up, they'd have to go right past the bathroom to get to the living room. So I go back out into the living room and my radio was blaring with no one around. What made it weirder was my boglin, a rubber monster puppet, was perched on top of the radio when it was nowhere near it when I left the room. Story 28. I had a personal Mandela effect. Like a year ago, I read that R. Kelly was released from prison early. I went to work and everyone was talking about how crazy it was that they were just letting him out like that. I brought it up the next day and was asked what the hell I was talking about. And when I looked it up, there was nothing about it whatsoever, just that he was still in prison. I'm 9 sure it wasn't a dream, and if it was indiscernible from real life. Story 29. My husband and I were renovating a house, built in 1924, to eventually move into. I was in the second-story bathroom when I heard him from the basement yell, "Hey, what are you doing?" I answered, "Painting the bathroom?" Thinking, duh, you know this as I've been in here a while. My husband immediately answered from across the house first floor, in a completely different room, yeah, okay. There was no one else in the house, and he was just as confused as I was when I asked him about it. Story 30. I had a dream of a big horned mountain sheep, very vivid, the kind with the round horns that wrap around. The next day, driving through the mountains alone, I saw a big horn sheep on the side of the road. I pulled over to observe, in my car. It looked exactly like the one in my dream. Unexplainable, but not exactly an exciting, life-changing event to care a lot about. Story 31. This one is weird because I am looking for a logical explanation and yes, I can think of them, but the sound is so distinctive. I live in a 3-story townhouse which is more than 100 years old. My good friend and landlord acquired the house around 2017, gutted it to nothing. Pipes, wires, everything gone and replaced with modern equipment. The 3 floors are 3 separate apartments, units, and I moved into the top floor after it was already occupied by tenants in the lower floors. Every night around 10, I hear my neighbor on the lower floor snap her deadbolt shut on her back door before bed. Fast forward a few years, the other tenants move out, and the other 2 units are empty for several months. Yet still, I keep hearing the deadbolt in the floor below snap shut around 10, give or take 15 minutes. The units are empty, and I know this because I have the keys to the other units. Eventually, the noise changes to around 11 p.m., but realize daylight savings time. I tell my friend about it and ask if he can think of anything mechanical that is in that part of the house, and can't think of anything mechanical over there. Later, my friend and I are watching TV in my apartment, and 10 rolls around. Clue chunk. He says, "Was that just the deadbolt closing on the empty apartment you've been talking about? No ghost encounters or anything in this place for all the years I have lived, except that fudge noise. There are people that live there now. I want to ask them if they hear it, but don't want to be the crazy neighbor. I recorded it before by leaving an old iPhone next to my back door on voice memo. You can hear it, but it's not the same as in person. It will be that time of the night again soon. Maybe you'll try again." Story 32. In September 23, I took the wrong exit off of the highway on my way to a friend's graduation party. I was driving alone and ended up by a massive hospital that was about an hour away from my home. At the time, I was concerned for my mother's well-being as I was letting her use my car occasionally, but I was unsure if she should be driving. I imagined visiting my mother there, half dead after a car accident. I was literally tearing up thinking about it and disgusted at myself for this horrible, morbid, intrusive thought. I returned home from the after party at like 3 to 4 a.m. My mom was up very early getting ready to do her prayers before heading to church. She used to get there super early before 6 a.m. I gave her my car keys. I go to bed. I wake up gasping, literally panicked for no obvious reason. My phone is ringing. It woke me up. I scrambled to pick it up, and before I see it, I'm already certain that it is my mom. Even though she should not have been calling at that hour, she would have been in church. Driving in the dark to the church, she totaled the car and was hospitalized and badly injured. I asked her which hospital, and she didn't know. She woke up dazed in a hospital bed, confused. But I was certain she was at the specific hospital. Mind you, there are at least 4 other hospitals closer by. And of course she was. I was terrified that she would die. I thought it was too coincidental. I predicted the whole event not 6 hours before. Even the way I panicked waking up before I knew what was wrong. But she did not. She healed well. She stayed in the hospital for a month. In hindsight, this was all just intuition screaming at me to wake up. She was diagnosed with dementia 3 months later. Story 33. My unconscious grandma somehow waited for all of her kids and grandkids to show up before she passed. This was before cell phones, so there was no planning or group text. We just drifted in from different parts of town. A few of us had a reason to stop by, but most of us just felt like visiting her that day. We all knew she was getting close, so people were checking in more often, but the timing was still wild. Everyone was there to say goodbye and to be there for each other. I'm agnostic, and I still chalk it up to coincidence, but that moment always sticks with me and makes me wonder if there is more going on than we understand. Answer: I'm an ICU nurse and have seen it enough that it does seem like people have slight control over when they pass when they're close. The story of grandma going as soon as the room was empty for 30 seconds is really common. I even remember a time when the wife told her husband it was okay to go, and he just up and did right then. Crazy, but I saw it happen. Story 34. In high school, we used to play hide and seek in the dark in my friend's unfinished but full basement. The stairs came down kind of in the middle of the space so you could walk circles around it. There was one corner that particularly felt off, and we didn't like to be over there. The first weird thing that truly happened, besides a bad feeling, was my friend swore he saw someone crawling in the corner when he was seeking, but again, no one was willing to hide over there. We decided to set up an old camera that had night recording on it. Middle of the day, pitch dark in the basement, pointed it straight at the corner and left it to run for a few hours. We watched some movies upstairs. Some people went on an ice cream run, chilled in my friend's room. We brought it upstairs later and started watching it. The usual orbs or dust floated through. Then we heard our friends leaving for ice cream in the audio, but the timestamp was completely wrong. The date time was correct on the camera, but the timing of the audio was distorted. Then we heard metal chairs scraping and pool balls clacking, both of which existed down there close to the corner. No one went into the basement while we were recording. We were pretty spooked but left it be. The next day I get a call from the person who owned the camera, making me swear I didn't do anything to the footage. It had been completely erased. She swore she didn't do it, and it just disappeared. Finally, I had a dream where I was following a trail, and a voice basically told me to turn around and stop pursuing this. I took it as a sign from a higher being looking out for me. Went in the basement only a couple more times and always felt tension yucky until I finally refused to go to her house anymore. Story 35. I'm a paramedic in Louisiana. One morning I called into work. It was a Friday and I needed a 3-day weekend. My boss was super chill. She told me to enjoy myself. I had about an hour commute, and most days my girlfriend and I would carpool together. While she got dressed for her workday, I laid in bed and had this nagging voice in my head telling me I needed to go work. I pushed it off several times and it just kept getting louder. Go to work. I gave in and told her that I would be carpooling with her after all. Our commute is mostly on I-55, a bridge in the swamp that doesn't have much traffic. It doesn't have a shoulder, just enough room for a car to pull over, and a wall to keep you from driving over the side into the water. There's only an exit every 7 to 10 miles. Northbound side is its own bridge, and southbound is its own. We're about 20 minutes into our commute, and I am speeding. The speed limit is 70 mph, but with how isolated it is, I usually drive around 85 mph. I'm in the fast lane, and I notice a van pulled over to the right. No hazard lights, just parked. It's not an odd thing to see. People are constantly breaking down in this area, running out of gas mostly due to it being such a long stretch without an exit or gas station. So I see this van, and between the van and the wall, I notice someone doing CPR. I quickly pull over and tell my girlfriend to call 911. I approach the van and tell the guy doing CPR I can help. He tells me his friend just got out of rehab and did some heroin. I assess the male on the ground. I feel a pulse, but he isn't breathing. I've worked many of overdoses in my career, but from the comfort of an ambulance. This day I had nothing. I gave this guy mouth to mouth for about 15 minutes until a police officer arrived with Narcan. By the time an ambulance arrived, he was awake and alert. Like I said, I've worked many overdoses. The thing that makes me replay this in my head is the voice telling me to get up. It was profound. If I would have never called into work and went for my normal time, it would have been hours before and he would be dead. If I wouldn't have listened to that voice, he would be dead. Something spoke to me. I don't know what it is, but I wish it would speak to me more. I wish every day I could hear that voice again. Story 36. I already shared one story, but I thought of another. This was back when I was in high school. The Sega Dreamcast had just come out, and I was at my friend's parents' house with 3 of our other friends playing NFL 2K in their family room. I was always into physical humor, purposely falling backwards in my chair, intentionally tripping over things and making a spectacle of falling to the ground in a way that looked harmful but was not. Stuff like that. I don't remember exactly what, but something happened during the game that made me mad, and I leapt into the air. Starting out as a vertical jump, and rotating forward into being on all fours parallel to the ground. I'd done that same jump many times before for dramatic effect. The landing looks much more painful than it really is. But this particular time I didn't fall straight down as the laws of physics would dictate. I just floated. I levitated there for a second before slowly drifting towards the floor and landing softly. All four of my friends just stared at me with a WTF 1,000-yard stare, and finally one asked, "You were in the air for so long. How did you do that?" I immediately tried a few more times to recreate it and could not. Ever since that day, I've had recurring dreams of being able to float. I've seen videos of athletes who jump straight up and push their arms and legs down at the apex to make it appear as if they're floating. Maybe I did something like that by complete accident, but to this day I can't explain it. Story 37. What happened between my last memory of the night and waking up in the back seat of a car I did not recognize, spaked and covered in mud and a cut above my eye. Long story short, I shared a half-gallon of bottom-shelf gin with a group of 5 friends when we were teenagers. I didn't have much experience drinking, so I didn't know how fast you could get to blackout tipsy. Also, we were drinking in a wooded area by a trailer park where one of my friends lived. The last thing I remembered was falling down trying to walk back to the trailer. What happened as told by my friends. We had to walk over a shallow creek, and I wouldn't get up after falling down in it. They were all too tipsy to help, so they left me there. In the morning, they realized how fudge up that was and went back to get me, but I wasn't there. After panicking for a bit, they left to drive to the nearby gas station. On the way they found me 7 houses down, sleeping in someone's front yard. One of the guys in the group tried to stir me awake, and another guy got frustrated and kicked me in the head, hence the split eyebrow. They got me in the car somehow. To this day, I wish I knew what happened. How did I end up so far down the road? How did AI get out of the creek? How did I not drown in that creek? Story 38. We moved from Orlando to Atlanta. A few months after moving, we went to a Braves game on a whim and bought cheap tickets in the nosebleed section. Seated a row or two behind us was our former neighbor from Orlando. We weren't close with him, actually rarely spoke except for the occasional pleasantly when getting the mail, so there was no way for us to know he would be there. It was just a crazy coincidence. Story 39. I every once in a while have very vivid deja vu. Places I've never been and situations I've never been in before happen in my dreams, and then it happens in real life. One specific one I remember was in high school. I had a dream I was standing in a group with people of different ages and races, and we were just waiting and talking. One person was sitting on an overturned white construction bucket wearing shorts and white shoes. There was grass and a white object I couldn't place. Then the dream was over. A couple months later, we're at band camp. The people I'm with are my section mates. There were no instruments visible in the dream, but we were on a water break. You typically leave them somewhere else. They're all just talking and I'm listening, so I look down and there it is, my deja vu. One of the girls is sitting on a bucket. It's summer, so she had shorts on, and one of our props is laid out for use in a few moments. A white tarp. I immediately try to tell everyone I'm having a super crazy deja vu. We talk all the time on a field. No, it's exactly the same. Sure. This has happened a few times, and I usually just keep it to myself. Sometimes I wonder if I can predict the future. It's so accurate, but it's just too infrequent. Story 40. I live in Washington, and my elderly mom lived in Texas. We've been estranged for years. Very dysfunctional family, and it's complicated. And she would rarely answer the phone for me, or anyone else for that matter. Last January, I was dozing on the couch and was suddenly woken up by this really bad feeling that something was wrong with her. I couldn't get her to answer the phone, and as the day went on, the feeling just persisted. The next morning, when I still couldn't get in touch with her, I told my husband I just knew something was really wrong and that I was flying to Texas ASAP. He kind of blew me off about it and was understandably irritated that I was planning on buying last-minute tickets based on a feeling, but I insisted I was going and bought tickets to leave the next morning. While I was at the gate waiting to board, I got a call from an old friend of hers who lives in South Carolina and whom I haven't spoken to in years. He said, "C-Tech 1787, I have a really bad feeling about your mom. I think something is wrong with her, and I can't get her to answer her phone." Again, typical. "Have you talked to her recently?" I told him I had the same overwhelming feeling and was literally a few minutes from getting on the plane to Texas. This call in itself was so weird. When I got to her house, I found her hallucinating, and her lower legs and feet were a deep purple and very cold. So I called 911, and she spent several days in the ICU, and then about 6 weeks in the hospital and then medical rehab. Thank God they were able to save her legs because I really thought she was going to lose them. It turns out that when I found her, she was septic from a long untreated UTI, and medical staff told me she had been within a couple of days from passing. One thing I learned from this experience is if a UTI goes untreated, not only can you develop sepsis, which can result in the kind issues that developed in her legs and feet, but it can also cause major hallucinations and, of course, ultimately passing. Apparently, UTIs are a very common cause of passing in seniors. Another thing I learned through this is to not ignore very strong negative feelings. It may end up being nothing, but in this case, it was definitely something I'm glad I didn't just brush off. The whole thing was the weirdest, most unreal experience of my life. I'm not religious, but there was definitely something strange happening here. Answer: I was fighting with my ex-boyfriend at the time right before we broke up, and there was one day I just had this strong, horrible feeling like something bad was going to happen. He absolutely belittled me and my made-up feelings like I was using it as a weapon against him or something. I found out a couple days later that my ex-fiancé had eliminated himself because he sent me a goodbye email. Story 41. When I was in college, I liked to go to Five Guys for food before work. I was pretty routine, went about the same time, and always been to the bathroom right before I left on my way to work. The bathrooms were down a long hallway in the back and were each single person bathrooms, one for each gender. The bathroom door had 2 locks, a handle lock and a chain lock, which I always found somewhat odd. Anyways, one particular day I was there and the place was pretty dead. I'm going to the bathroom right before I heading to work, so I walk down the long hallways and try to open the bathroom door. It opens, but then it catches on the chain lock. I instantly let the door lock and said, sorry. I stood there for a second thinking, who the fudge would only lock the door with the chain lock and not the handle? As I'm standing there, I don't hear anything. No response. No, why'd you open my door? Which I thought was odd. I really had to go, so I went ahead and knocked apprehensively. No answer. I started thinking, I wonder if some shoot-head little kid chain locked the door and then squeezed out just to screw with people. After another minute of hearing absolutely nothing, I slowly open the door again until it catches on the chain. I can see the toilet in the diagonal corner and the sink with a mirror in the corner closest to the door opening, which with the mirror allows me to see in the corner behind the door too. I don't see anyone at all, but I say hello one more awkward time. Nothing. I can see 3 of the 4 corners in this tiny, brightly lit bathroom and have heard no responses, so I figure my guess on a kid locking the chain was right and decide to reach in and start trying to unchain the door so I can piss and get to work. Just as I'm reaching in, my whole arm now in the bathroom and reaching around the door, a goddamn hand reaches forward from the single corner I can't see and flushed the fudge toilet. I noped out of there so fudge fast, ran for the door, and didn't stop until I got to my car. I didn't go back to the Five Guys for a very long time. Who doesn't say something in that situation? Story 42. A UFO chased by fighter jets. When I was younger, me and this girl I was seeing used to drive out into the middle of nowhere as we could never get time alone at either house. At about 1 a.m., I went to take a piss and noticed these weird orange lights in the sky, coming off what looked like triangle-shaped things. Where I live in certain times of the year, it doesn't get completely dark, so I could see them against the sky. I woke her up and we watched them for maybe 15-20 minutes. This was early 2000s. I did take some crappy photos on my phone at the time, but you couldn't really see much. After that amount of time, we heard a roar and saw 2 fighter jets fly over us, low to the ground at high speed. Their wing lights were off. They went straight for the triangle shapes, and I thought it was some kind of night exercise. The black shapes suddenly shot straight upward into the sky with a massive boom, and the fighter jets followed. But it was obvious that they couldn't keep up, and the triangles disappeared. In all, there was probably about 5 triangles, as each had 3 lights on each one, and appeared to be dipping down over an area of water, and then flying back up to rejoin the others. They were completely silent the whole time, except when they flew off at high speed. We both saw it, and it wasn't of any technology that I'm aware of even today. They shot straight up into the clear sky until I could no longer see their lights. I still don't know if it was some training exercise, but I know of nothing that can move like that, going from complete stop to a speed that can outrun a fighter jet in maybe 1 second. Story 43. I worked at a doctor's office for a while. One day I was in the office by myself, so I locked up the office from the outside to go out to lunch. By the time I got to my car, the office key was gone. Not in my pockets or my purse or anywhere on the ground or still in the lock. Just straight up gone, with very few possibilities as to what happened. I called my boss, the doctor, who got upset and sent me home for the day. Probably the most WTF lost item of my life. Answer: if you happen to still have that jacket and purse, inspect the lining. My husband smoked for many years before before we got together. He constantly lost the standard Bic lighters, as is tradition. Well, after he quit, he found a small hole in the side lining of his heavy jacket pocket. While looking at the lining, he felt a strange shift in the coat. Turns out there were at least 6 lighters nestled in between the outer layer and the inner part. Maybe this mystery key has a similar fate. Story 44. I was roughly 11. My grandmother was watching us as the snowstorm caused both my mom, who was with my grandfather, and my dad to get stuck in various locations on the way home. As I was trying to clear the driveway, I was all the way towards the bottom of this lengthy stretch. My grandmother told me later that she felt a massive urge to get me inside. She ran to the front door and told me to move. I've never heard my grandmother yell before or since, so luckily I moved. A massive branch fell right where I was, landing on top of the shovel I had left behind. That branch was heavy enough it took 2 people to move later. I'm not sure what people believe in terms of God or spirits or whatever, but that day sticks out to me as one I can't solve. Story 45. I was riding home with my mom after work. My feet hurt, so I took my shoes off. When we finally got home, I went to put my shoes back on, and I couldn't find the other one. We finally decided to just retrace our steps to see if I had dropped it at my job's parking lot or something. On the way back, we saw it in a ditch on the side of the road. I knew it was mine because of the prescription insoles. Story 46. This is a crazy story, but I was not the only one that experienced it, and I still can't explain it to this day. When I was a teen one night, I had a really weird dream and woke up from it dawn. Except I woke up in my best friend's room instead of my own room, in a bed next to her sleeping. I was confused and dazed once I realized where I was, and that this was not where I went to sleep the night before. I noticed her phone was in the bed charging next to me, and I tried to turn on the screen to take a look at the time, but I was unable to, as it seemingly glitched and shut down. I wanted to try to wake her up, but then I heard steps approaching her room, and not knowing what to do, I laid back down and covered myself over the head with a blanket. It's important to note here that my friend shared a bunk bed with her sister at the time, and she was in the top bunk with wooden railing around the bed, so it was hard to see into her top bunk from the ground. Someone opened her bedroom doors, walked to her closet near the bed, and from the sound of it, took some stuff out and left the room after about a minute. While I was laying down and waiting for them to leave, I noticed that I was actually laying on my friend's arm, and she started moving in her sleep. I was still freaking out and decided to lift the blanket after whoever was in her room left. The next thing I know, I lifted the blanket and opened my eyes, and I was back in my own room in my own bed. I went over to my friend the same day and told her what happened, and she freaked out as well, and told me that she suddenly got woken up very early that morning and felt that her arm was asleep, even though she was not laying on it. She also noticed that her phone was off and acting weird when she unplugged it from the charger, even though it was on when she fell asleep. I mentioned the person in her room. She said that her mom was getting ready for her morning shift and would usually enter her bedroom to get her clothes, as the big closet in the room was a shared closet. It's been years since, and both of us are still weirded out and tried to find any logical explanation to our overlapping experiences. Story 47. I tucked my son into bed. The light was out, but I could see from the hallway light. As I left the room, I stepped over the dark mass that is the dog. Like always, I dragged my toes across his chest for petting him with my foot, and I hear his tail thumping the floor as he wags it. I close the door but a crack and head downstairs. I get to the bottom, and the dog is laying there in the dining room, thumping his tail at me. There's only one set of stairs in the house, and I was on it. Story 48. About 10 years ago, I was hired to write a movie for the Sci-Fi Channel, back when they still did that. Not too prestigious, but there are various reasons I wanted to do it, mainly that it was definitely getting made a few months later, after countless projects that almost happened and then didn't. Even projects I made really good money on. What's the point of a cool movie or show no one ever knows about? But I digress. It came with the outline already in place. The first scene was a father with his daughter. For the life of me, I couldn't write this fudge scene. Even though it was totally generic and anyone could, I was struggling to get the voices right. I started falling into a passing spiral as I had just gone through a serious breakup and was feeling like a loser living alone. My parents had died recently too. I was thinking, I thought I would have a kid and an Oscar by now. Look at me. This is horrible. Then I thought to myself, I should go read these stories I wrote in 3rd grade. I had this weird, huge closet upstairs, and I had shoved a bunch of stuff from my parents' apartment up there without really looking at it. I would always see the yellow paper sticking out and think that these were stories I had written back then. I thought maybe they will remind me what it's like to be a kid. At that moment, the LaCroix on the end table next to me slid off and hit the floor. The table isn't slanted or anything. Nothing's fallen off since. I said to the room if I should go read those stories, do that again. I put the can back on the table and it flew off again. So I went up to the closet and got the papers down. Except what I thought were my old stories BC of the yellow paper weren't that at all. They were a series of letters my mother had written to me but never sent. The first was essentially the topic of the scene I was struggling with. Then I was able to write the scene. And the whole script, I think it came out really good. The movie itself, less so. A bunch of days were cut during shooting, making things incomprehensible. But my time on set was really healing. When we were shooting that scene, at a house in the winter later at night than any kid should have been working, I found myself remembering the night I wrote it. Then I realized it was the 5th anniversary of my mother's passing. The sound person asked me if I was crying, even though we were in a dark hallway. I said no. The hazer is irritating my eyes. Later that night, I was like, hey, I lied. I was crying. She said, I know. Anyway, writing this now on the 14th anniversary of my mother's passing while my baby daughter sleeps upstairs. Story 49. I was in my basement in my new home. My 2 cats came in from outside with their tails flared like a raccoon's. I knew they were scared. I was asking them what was wrong, and I felt a cold breeze go by me and a young person's laugh. I walked to the other side of the stairwell, and I have a mirror hanging on the wall and caught a glimpse of the back of a ghost or something that was wearing blue apple-bottom jeans and a long-sleeve shirt that was stripped horizontally and had long, curly red hair that went behind the stairwell. I got the goosebumps and was scared to check the back of the steps. I thought maybe a young child chased my cats into the basement and was hiding. I eventually checked moments later, and no one was there. Story 50. I don't think this one's actually that hard to explain, but back in July of 2005, my family had a trip planned to London. The 77 bombings happened. We didn't cancel our trip. It was scheduled for a couple of weeks later on the 21st, and my parents figured things would be settled down by then. I, at 9 years old, begged them to cancel our trip. I remember distinctly telling them that these things happen in recurring instances. I knew it was not a one and done. I felt it in my bones. There would be more bombings. I don't think it was because of me, but they did wind up canceling the trip. On July 21st, 4 more bombings were attempted. Thankfully, only the detonators went off, and no one died. But I fudge told them. To this day, no one in my family gives me credit for that. But I know I saved us, damn it. As far as not being hard to explain, I was only 5, but I had a completely separate, very traumatic experience on 911, and I remember that day very well. I think the concept of multiple terror attacks just kind of burned itself into my brain. But also, I definitely do just get feelings sometimes. I think we all do. There's a lot more to this weedy world than we're able to explain. I like it that way. Story 51. So there was this one night when I was home alone, just chilling and watching TV. Out of nowhere, I heard this faint music playing, like an old-timey piano tune. I thought maybe it was coming from outside, but when I checked, everything was silent. The weirdest part? The music seemed to be coming from inside the house, but I couldn't pinpoint where it was from. It played for a few minutes and then just stopped. I never figured out where it came from, and it never happened again. It was like my own little ghost concert. Story 52. I was with my brother, mom, and girlfriend in my